Welcome to the documentary from the BBC World Service, where we report the world, however difficult the issue, however hard to reach. Podcasts from the BBC World Service are supported by advertising.
I am Bijoy Kannan, Master, Captain of merchant ships. Initially, we heard about the pandemic in January, but we weren't too bothered, honestly speaking, because we were just apprehensive that we shouldn't be calling China around that time.
But then, country after country went into lockdown.
So that was the time that we realized no country is basically going to allow us to get off. Then it started getting very stressful around that time.
Captain Cannon quickly realized that his crew was struggling.
The fact that there was no certainty when we'll get off would mean that we started fearing the worst. I could see some of my crew members just spending the nights and not able to sleep. I myself was disturbed, and concentrating on work was difficult. We used to go into a shell. Some of them were even thinking of physical harm. One or two people were even thinking that what's the point of living this way? It got to that extent, actually.
The situation left Captain Cannon having to face a difficult decision. You'll hear more on that later. His story is the story of the thousands of seafarers stranded at sea because of COVID-19. Maritime organizations estimate that there are up to 200,000 men and women who are tired, mentally stretched, currently stuck working on vessels across the globe, unable to be relieved of their duties. They're calling on the United Nations to ask governments to intervene. If they don't, they say, they risk a humanitarian disaster. And that would be a problem for all of us. After all, seafarers are the ones transporting 90% of all goods, our medicine, our clothes, our food. This is Assignment on the BBC World Service, and I'm Estelle Doyle. For this programme, I've spoken with a dozen seafarers around the world. You won't hear them all, but you will hear their common battle to be allowed home, while they carry on working 24/7 on what many describe as a floating prison.
First question is, how are you at the moment? Yeah, to be honest, I'm really tired, mentally, physically. I want to go home.
Meet Daniel. He's just finished his shift on an oil tanker. It's 10 p.m. somewhere in the middle of the Black Sea, 8 a.m. in the Philippines, where his family is waiting for him.
Do you know when you might be able to go home? I really don't know. I really don't know if I can go home with this situation with the COVID right now. This affects my family so much. The hardest part is that my daughter was asking when I will be home. I cannot answer.
Daniel is not his real name. He'd rather not give it as he worries about losing his job, but he's happy for us to use his recordings. Daniel has currently no choice but to stay and work on the ship, even though his contract ended months ago. He hasn't had a single day off for a year now, and works on average 10 to 12 hours a day. Even in normal circumstances, seafaring is one of the toughest jobs in the world. The long hours, the isolation, the physical hardship, the sleep disruption, all of this was already getting to Daniel last summer. And so, when his vessel docked at the port of Rotterdam, he opened up to a chaplain.
I was 3 months on board my contract. I told him I have a hard time in here. The job is overwhelming. Hours of work are beyond. I asked him to pray for me that God gave me enough strength.
That chaplain was Dennis Woodward. He offered spiritual support then and still does today. He's the one who introduced me to Daniel and the world of seafaring, for which he has an infectious passion dating back to his childhood.
I was always fascinated with the port of Rotterdam, how big these tankers, these container ships are. You sort of go, wow, and the tonnage and how big, and and that is really super impressive. And in all fairness, that is still the 10, 11-year-old within me. I am there to help the people, but when I come next to a ship that size, it still amazes me every time.
The largest in Europe, the Port of Rotterdam welcomes tens of thousands of ships per year, consists of a dozen terminals and 5 oil refineries, all increasingly automated. Dennis says that this means life at port is a far cry from the romantic image of sailors enjoying days on end of letting loose.
Some of these vessels have such quick turnaround times, meaning they can leave again in 30 to 36 hours, sometimes even 24. And so this sense of exploration, of adventure, is almost completely gone. Because if you dock in the port of Rotterdam, it's not these beautiful iconic buildings that you see. No, it's storage facilities, it's pipelines, containers, it's cranes, it's other ships. And what you're smelling, and it's all this heavy industry, and it's all work. And you can smell it. It's like you're fueling your car at the petrol station. And I would say maybe slightly heavier than that, where you can at one point feel maybe a bit of a heaviness on your lungs. And this is a daily reality for many seafarers.
That daily reality has been further restricted by COVID-19. When at port, seafarers can no longer leave their vessels, even for a few hours, and they have close to no human contact outside of their crew. Dennis is one of the very few people allowed on board. And in some cases, he can't even make it that far.
There are about 80 tankers at anchor in front of the Dutch and Belgium coast, so that you're talking between 12 and 1,500, maybe up to 2,000 crew being stuck. They're anchored there because the bottom fell out of the oil price, but because so many storage facilities are full up, basically the tanker becomes one big, large storage facility, and when the price recovers, then we can discharge because we'll get far more for it. The problem with that reasoning is that you're also gambling with people's lives.
Dennis says sailors live and work on board for the day they can disembark. But COVID-19 has meant that day keeps on being pushed back. Even when they've reached the end of their contracts, many seafarers cannot be replaced. And yet, vessels need to be permanently manned. So, if they can't be replaced, well, they have to carry on working.
We're not wired as such to spend 10, 11, 12 months on board a ship. We're not built for that. And yet, what we're asking at the moment of seafarers is basically to run double marathons. If you're expecting after about 42 kilometers the marathon to be over, then you know the finish is coming up. It's still hard, but you know that's coming up. But then suddenly that gets pushed, 42 becomes 50, becomes 60, becomes 75. And so what does that do to you? Not just physically, which is already exhausting to keep going, but also what does this do to you mentally?
There are over 1.5 million seafarers in the world. Every month, 100,000 are usually relieved and go home to recover. But crew change has now become much harder, if not impossible, due to COVID-19 restrictions. Take Hannah Gerlach, a young cadet who's working on a container ship travelling around Asia. Though due to be relieved, she's been on board...
No, 8 months.
That's quite a long time.
Yeah, it was not planned.
As a German citizen, she could fly home, but first needs to actually get off the ship. Twice she was due to be relieved. Initially in Singapore, but the port went into lockdown, and then in Colombo in Sri Lanka.
But 3 days before my sign-off, my luggage was already packed. I got the message that it's not allowed anymore in Colombo.
Even an injured foot wasn't a good enough reason to be repatriated.
I stepped somehow wrong, and my foot started to hurt and was also swollen and blue. But now it's getting better.
For Captain Cedric Pereira, who joined the business 40 years ago,
it is more stressful today than what it was in those days.
The problem he and his Indian crew face is the opposite. Their oil tanker currently shuttles between the ports of Liverpool and Rotterdam, and either port would allow them to leave their vessel. But then they couldn't fly home.
We have accepted the fact that till international flights start landing in India, we have to stay on board. Like tonight, I leave Liverpool, then I load in Rotterdam, I come back to Liverpool.
Okay, so you just carry on going back and forth then until...
Yeah, we are on the front line, still moving the cargoes, giving all of you all the oil you'll require.
The restrictions don't only stop seafarers from getting home, but also from receiving medical help.
We had a sick crew member, and I tried to arrange doctors in the ports, but in some ports it was simply not possible, or the doctor who was announced was finally not showing up.
As the seaman's condition worsened, Captain Stefan Berger changed tactics.
At the end, in Dubai, I decided to make it a real emergency. I called the ambulance car, and they saw, yes, this crew member needs to go to the hospital, definitely, but they said we are not able to take him there.
After protracted negotiations involving calls to his company and the port authorities, the sick seafarer was eventually taken to hospital and treated.
It was a little bit challenging, definitely.
Captain Stefan Berger says he understands and accepts such challenges, even the fact that he couldn't get married in May as planned.
It has happened before. I'm not the first seafarer who missed his own wedding.
What keeps him going, he says, is the pride he feels for the role seafarers play in keeping goods flowing and supplying the world. But a little more recognition would help.
We find out now about all our heroes, the health workers, for example. We hope, of course, that the people will realize that there are heroes who are at sea and making sure that the supply chains are kept running. We are very often hidden heroes because we are out at the oceans.
On the 1st of May, ships around the world sounded their horns to highlight seafarers' contribution to keeping global trade going during the COVID-19 pandemic. The idea being to emulate those clapping to celebrate key workers. Campaigning is also happening on social media. #BringOurSailors has brought seafarers' wives together who are finding comfort and support in each other. One of them is Shiny. She's based in India. When she first got engaged, she says she hadn't quite grasped what being a seafarer's wife would mean.
At that time, I think I was pretty innocent about the field. But after I got married and after he started sailing once we were in relation, then I really felt the pinch. I could feel the distance whenever he travels, but I never thought that it would be so difficult.
Shiny fell pregnant last year. When I spoke to her, she was 37 weeks, her first child due any minute. Like most mothers-to-be, she had pictured her husband by her side as she'd give birth.
That was always the picture which I had in my mind. And when I started hearing about this lockdown in March 24th, I was like, you got to get back.
And it almost happened.
Actually, he was there about 15 to 20 days back at an Indian port. He was not allowed to sign off here. So he had to travel back.
So he was actually in an Indian port just 15, 20 days ago?
He just left. I think he's just still crossing Sri Lanka. That was kind of a blow because we were really hoping that he will be able to.
And so then the decision was made that, okay, well, if you can't get off, then just stay on the boat, carry on working, and then just go to your next destination. Is that what happened?
Yes, that is exactly what happened. It's just that, just imagine my husband's situation. He doesn't even have an end date of when he can see his child, maybe after a week or 2 weeks, or maybe after a month, at least something that, will keep him going with some hope.
I know he's been telling you to mentally prepare. Have you been able to do that?
Frankly speaking, I'm not being able to do that. I think every day night I would wake up and then I would be like, no, he has to come back. And I would go back on Twitter and then search all the news if there's anything positive to, a ray of hope somewhere. But yeah, I've been telling him that I've prepared myself just to keep him strong and going. I can just imagine how tough it must be for him. So already he's missing his first child's birth. It might be even more tough if I break down.
Shani has since given birth to a little girl. She hasn't decided yet on a name. Her husband is still at sea. No news yet for his sign-off. 7 p.m. The English Channel. A cargo ship is on its way to the Middle East from Rotterdam. Its British captain, who wants to remain anonymous, has just sailed past his home and his children. He knows he won't get there until at least another couple of months. His words are voiced by a producer.
Morale has taken a real hit. At least 3 of us have had a relation pass away during this trip. Some of us have had our loved ones in hospital. This is always hard at the best of times, but if you can't be there to say goodbye, attend the funeral, or look after your loved ones when they need you most, it's always going to have a bigger impact on your mental health. Especially when you still have to get up for work every day, it leaves very little room for grieving. The moods are getting increasingly more difficult to deal with. The sadness, uncertainty, irritability have all increased, and personal relationships have definitely deteriorated. I've seen people starting to make a lot more basic mistakes, which is the real indication that fatigue is setting in. It will only be a matter of time before someone gets hurt.
Hello?
Hello?
Good morning. How have you been?
Not been very good. In the middle of something, sometimes I kind of feel that my heart is racing too fast and it starts to pump very fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I start feeling very nervous, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes,
that must have been tough.
Yeah.
This is Rinny Matthew, a full-time clinical psychologist working for Fleet Care, which offers advice and support to seafarers. We were allowed to listen in to one of her counselling sessions.
It's been over 1 month that I've finished my time on board, and still, because of the situation, I've not been able to go home, and it's taking a toll on me. Yeah.
Does this happen while you're at work as well?
Yeah. Sometimes it happens while I'm at work, sometimes while I'm in my cabin trying to fall asleep.
Okay.
And I feel sometimes my throat gets dry and my neck feels stiff.
The helpline was launched in March and now receives dozens of calls every week. Rinny says counselling remotely has its limitations, so she also tries to teach her callers techniques that they can use on their own.
And close your eyes.
Okay.
Okay, we will begin the exercise now. Just try to place your one hand, which is now...
Before starting her job less than a year ago, Rinny knew very little about seafarers and the specific challenges they face working away from home.
It was quite shocking for me because seafarers particularly have been, the kind of profession which is still quite invisible to the population on shore. They're not provided the kind of professional assistance required.
As she found out more, a picture emerged of a very vulnerable population. In 2019, a study carried out by Yale University showed that
25% of the seafaring population they studied suffered from clinical depression, 17% from anxiety disorders, and approximately 7% from sleep disorders. And these numbers have been stated to be considerably higher than the general working population on shore.
The same research also showed that 20% of those surveyed had contemplated suicide or self-harm. Another study suggests that suicide rates among seafarers have more than tripled since 2014. The reduction of staff on vessels, leading to more pressure at work, would be partly to blame. Increased internet access on ships could be another reason, Rinny says.
They are regularly in touch with the issues that their family members are facing on shore. And if there is a rift between them and their family member, and that if they do not have the kind of emotional regulation required, then there is, of course, these incidences of suicide or jumping off board, being lost at sea.
Needless to say, the current pandemic has amplified these issues.
There has been a decrease in the number of hours that they are sleeping. There are mood issues. There is more of irritability. They do not feel like working the next day. So they want to stay back in their rooms. They don't want to interact much with other people.
It was horrible for me. Even now I think I'm on board. I just wake up and I just go to the washroom and I just drink hot water and take shower sometimes. It is horrible. I don't share those things with anyone even now because now they will say that why are you still working in this industry if you hate this industry. I'm like, I don't hate this industry, but there are problems that need to be raised.
Today, Aditya Giri is a maritime blogger and writes about the seafarer's experience, hoping to raise awareness and bring about change. As you heard, he himself joined the profession a few years ago.
I'm from a very small city in India, so I never went out of my city at that point of a time alone. So it was a big thing for me to see the world and to roam around and to work on a ship and to become an officer, to become a captain and have a uniform, and then everything you see in the movies.
and the prospect of a starting salary that can be as high as $750 a month had its appeal.
Because it's a high-paying job as compared to what you get in India on land.
But life on board turned out to be very different to what he had imagined.
You are going away from your family, you're living with some random people. I used to work for 14, 15 hours. I just used to go and sleep and then wake up and then go to the work again. But sometimes when you're in port, you have to work 18 hours, 19 hours. So you don't really get time. You sleep somewhere, you hide and you sleep.
Aditya says some of his superiors also bullied him, an experience which staff surveys suggest is not that uncommon. Joining him as an engine cadet was a friend with whom he used to share a SIM card to communicate back home. Aditya had a sense his friend was struggling, but didn't realize quite how much.
And then one day he's like, okay, just give me a SIM card, I have to upload photos. And he uploaded more than 100, 200 photos on his Facebook. And I was like, what happened to you? I mean, he was smiling all the way. And suddenly next day, I got a call on a walkie-talkie that the engine cadet is missing. We tried to find him everywhere on the ship, every nook and corner, but then we tried to search his cabin and we found a suicide letter.
The company organized a search and rescue operation, but had to abandon it after 3 days. The crew, meanwhile, had no choice but to get back to work.
I couldn't able to sleep for a week. It was a very difficult moment for me, to go back and work in a same environment where you are with the people, but you feel lonely at times, and you start crying in your cabin, and you start missing your family, you start missing your friends.
Aditya stresses that his experience shouldn't be generalized, and that many of his seafarer friends do enjoy rewarding careers, and he still cares deeply about the community. He went on to found the blogs Human at Sea and the Maritime Post, which together have hundreds of thousands of followers. Today he's one of those highlighting the plight of seafarers stuck at sea, unable to be relieved of their duties. And among the stories he shares, many are of despair, but also of camaraderie and resilience, and in some cases of taking matters into your own hands. Remember Captain Cannon? You heard him at the top of the programme, describing how after weeks of going from port to port and not being able to get off, his crew was getting increasingly distraught.
That was the moment I started feeling that ship staff and ships are getting unsafe if we continue to operate that way. It was high time that people do get off.
And he made a bold move. His ship was heading towards Singapore, but he heard there was a window of opportunity in India, where ports were now allowing crew changes for their own nationals. So he decided to divert the ship towards his home country.
Basically, it was my call, but everyone was supportive of the fact that this was a golden opportunity which we could avail.
It was an expensive decision. Chartering an old tanker cost tens of thousands of dollars a day, so every hour lost eats into profits.
This decision, although maybe captains won't do it, but I feel this was justified in the sense that it was, okay, it involves some monetary loss because the ship is paid by an hour or a day, and each hour that you are idle means some money is lost. But safety of ship, safety of life of people, and mental health is something which cannot be overemphasized. It cannot be quantified, it can't be measured. I think this was the best option available, and fortunately it worked.
Redirecting vessels towards ports where crew change is possible is only a solution in a small number of cases. When it is, most shipping companies say they are willing to pay for the extra costs, but that otherwise their hands are tied due to restrictions put in place by the nation-states themselves. The International Maritime Organization, or IMO, is the UN agency responsible for the safety and security of shipping. Together with the International Chamber of Shipping and Transport Workers' Unions, they have developed safety protocols, which they say can allow countries to implement crew change in a safe manner. But Fred Kenny from the IMO says there is one crucial measure nation-states need to adopt first.
What's critically important is that countries designate seafarers as key workers so that they can transit uninterrupted across international borders to either get to their ships or get home. And it's not just transit restrictions. There are issues with seafarers not being able to get visas to travel through countries. Seafarers on ships that are unable to go ashore may be denied access to urgent medical care. That's been a critical problem that we've been trying to address.
And meanwhile, they're keeping everything going. More than 90% of the world's trade travels via sea. How different all our lives would look if this were to stop. No petrol in our cars, no gadgets in our phone, no clothes on our back, no food in our supermarkets, just empty shelves.
Rotterdam chaplain Dennis Woodward is still in touch with Daniel, the Filipino seafarer you heard earlier. He's now been at sea for 1 year and 1 month, and he still hasn't been given a return date.
He's missed so much. It's really sad. And I find that deeply, deeply frustrating from a pastoral point of view. But I can't, by myself, I can't change as much as I'd like to. I can't change national policies, because that is absolutely what you're up against.
The first thing I would like to do when I get home is hug my wife and daughter, give them a big kiss. I just want to feel the presence and rest. I want to sleep straight 8 hours. I don't know if I can do that, especially now that I'm so used of sleeping maximum 5 hours, 4 hours, but I will try.
That's all from Assignment. It was presented and produced by me, Estelle Doyle. To hear more from the series, go to bbcworldservice.com/assignment.